This meeting of the Stafford Board of Supervisors is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Bumpke?
Here.
Mr. Cavalier?
Here.
Mrs. Maurer? Here. Mr. Milday?
I'm here.
Ms. Sellers? Here. Mr. Snellings?
Here.
Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us here and at home. My name is Paul Milday. I represent the Aquia District of the Board of Supervisors, for the Board of Supervisors. And I would like to remind everyone that today there is no public hearing scheduled for the evening. There'll be no 7 p.m. session for the Board of Supervisors. We will, however, be going into a joint meeting with the Planning Commission in Conference Room ABC at 5:30 p.m. That agenda is available online at our website now at www.staffordcountyva.gov. And I will now welcome Dr. Bruce Benson, who will give us an update on the schools.
Thank you, Chairman Mildy, Vice Chair Baumke, members of the board, Mr. Foley. It's my pleasure to share some updated information of some of the things that are going on in the school system. Next week, well, at least the governor's proclamation says it's next week. So apparently there's some a little bit of discussion as to whether it's this week or next week. But the governor proclaimed next week as Teacher Appreciation Week, so we're going with that. I told Teacher Advisory Group last night we could just say it's the whole month or the whole year because they do such an incredible job with our young people. But it's and all of you have seen that in classroom visits. We've got some incredible folks working all across the division. So if you have an opportunity to thank a teacher in the next couple of weeks, please do so and just let them know how much we appreciate what they do for our young people in our community and everything else that is entailed with what goes on in our schools. We have an update that's going to occur to our mobile app here by the end of the month that will help improve communication. It's one of the areas that we've really tried to focus on with the implementation of our new communication plan in this current year. By the end of the month, the app will be updated to allow parents to log in and look at their students' attendance, the attendance history, their schedule, courses at the secondary level, assignments, grades, lunch money, and bus routes, all from their phone. So we're excited. We're excited about that. It's an integration of services between our student information management system and our new web content management system. So secure access. They have to log in, and a password is required. But we're trying to make that information easily accessible to folks across the division as a whole. Stafford Education Foundation held a recognition dinner this past week. This has been a revitalization year for the Stafford Education Foundation. We had a successful fundraising year to include a golf tournament, a 5K run, and this culminating dinner. At the dinner, we honored Kathy Walker, who was principal at Hartwood and in our employment in the division for 43 years, I believe is the total number of years. Really incredible woman, incredible contributions to our community. She continues to serve by helping with teacher placements, student teaching placement assignments through Mary Washington University. It was a wonderful opportunity for us to recognize her. But the other thing that we got to do that we haven't been able to do for a couple of years, because we did have a successful fundraising year, is that we were able to offer innovative teaching grants again, and we provided 10 or 18 grants to either an individual teacher or teams of teachers across schools. Really some phenomenal projects, all of which will be on my to-visit list next year when the projects are going on. So they're not going to start until next year. So if board members are interested in attending one of those, we'll make sure that you're aware when that's going to happen. Mr. Mildy, one of those projects is connected to the big red oak at Stafford Elementary School, and 200 years of history here in Stafford County. So we're excited about that. We also gave 5 $2,000 scholarships, one to a graduating senior in each one of our high schools who intends to pursue a career in education. So that was really exciting. We heard some really great stories, and I'm not forecasting when we might be looking at high school number 6, but apparently I met the next band director for our newest high school as a part of that presentation. He let me know clearly that that's what he wants to pursue as an interest and would love to come back here to work. I am happy to hear that. We hired 270 teachers last year. We need every little advantage that we can get. And in that vein, we had each one of the recipients sign a letter of intent to come back and work for us. We gave them a ceremonial pen, which you have one of at your places here this afternoon. And I kept a copy of it, and we mailed a copy to each one of the scholarship recipients. I did tell the parents in a very quiet manner that it was non-binding, but we didn't have to tell the students that. So really an exciting evening, and it's great for us to be back in the position to be able to support both innovative teaching grants and scholarships for our students. As a part of our communication plan, we also are conducting listening tours this year. We have our last for the year scheduled on May 15th from 6 to 7:30 at Conway Elementary. It's an open invitation kind of an event. I'm going to provide a little bit of overview of things that we have that I think are pretty exciting coming up this summer, but then it will be open to questions, and we'll respond to questions from the community at that event. I believe you received an invitation from our Department of Student Services regarding a gallery opening. One of the things that I'm really proud of our efforts here in the school division is our ability to meet the needs of all kinds of students, regardless of what their needs are. Student Services will be celebrating that by having a permanent photography exhibit installed, and we'd love to see all of you come by and have some light refreshments and take a look at our young people in action in our schools, if that works with your schedule. The applicant tracking portion of our new ERP went live, and so now we have that integrated with our onboarding process. It's the really first piece of position control. So you have folks that are interested in a position, they apply through the system. At some point, they're offered a position, and then we were able to track their entire time with us, where they're assigned, what the funding source is for their position, and such, which will allow us to provide, I think, some really interesting analytics related to costs associated with programs across the division as a whole. And then there is last attachment, I think, in your packet is our graduation scheduled for June 17th. And we have to date who we have heard from that will be participating at the various graduation sites. So we just wanted to make you aware of who else might be on the podium with you at that particular school. And then finally, we continue to roll out our new logo. And I mentioned the pen will keep us close to your heart whenever you might want to take that pen with you. We have our new logo on there. And I think we also have a coffee mug for each of you. So, Mr. Mildy, that concludes my update for this afternoon. Be happy to respond to any questions board members might have.
Any questions? Ms. Sellers?
You brought up school lunches. There was a campaign, a Facebook campaign, where people were saying, go pay off the balances for students. Do you guys keep track of that, of who owes money for their school lunches?
Oh, we certainly do.
And
Yes,
if people
absolutely.
can pay it off? And
Well,
is there a way that you can?
Yeah, we have to work on the paying off piece of it, but we do monitor what folks have and whether or not there is any amount that is owed there. But we're looking for a mechanism. We've been discussing this, looking for a mechanism
You
to
guys
how
saw the
to,
same Facebook thing, huh?
how to support that. Yes,
Okay.
it's kind of that pay it forward kind of a thing within the context of student lunches.
Well, I know some folks who really want to help, so if you guys figure that out and have that way, just let me know, and we'll do I'll put out a Facebook campaign too. Okay?
Ms. Baumke?
Yes, I would just like to say I am always pleased with every report that you do to the Board of Supervisors. You continue to make improvements in the school division in so many different areas, and I just really thank you for your leadership, and it's noticed by everybody. Thank you.
Well, we have a great team, Ms. Baumke. I appreciate that, but we have a great team. We have a lot of folks that they're committed to do absolutely the best we can for our community. So, but thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I'll say this about that tree. Having lived here for over 30 years and I never noticed the tree until one of your STEAM teachers at Stafford Elementary. What does STEAM stand for? Do you know?
So, science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics.
It's an amazing after-school activities. They're doing all kinds of neat stuff. Anyway, she invited me in, and they showed me this tree. I don't know how it's evaded me. I like trees. But this is not just any old tree. This is a tree that's a couple hundred years old. There's a lot of trees in Stafford, but there are not really a lot of 200-year-old trees in Stafford. The union took care of that when they came here in 1862. So it's really an amazing tree. I'm not sure what the hour when you're allowed to be on that property, but if you haven't seen that tree right here across the street, it's quite something to get close to it. It sits down at the bottom of a hill, so you just don't see it from a distance. But I'm glad to hear that. They love their tree.
Yes, they do. And I think the really powerful thing here is that they're connecting stories to that tree and integrating it into their curriculum, which I think is going to be really exciting for young people at that school.
Thank you very much. All right. That brings us to the presentations by the public, and I do have one speaker card for Gary Scola, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you want to come up and say your name and address, and at the yellow light, you're down to 1 minute, and at red, you're out of time.
Yes, sir. It's Gary Scola from Newland Communities, 25 Apricot Street in Stafford. Basically, I just wanted to stop by. I was here, I think, about 7 weeks ago, speaking to you about the status of Embry Mill Road and Mine Road Phase 2 to provide access through the community. And after leaving that meeting, I tasked my team. I said, let's not only get this prepped for opening, let's make sure it's as safe and passable as possible for when the school year opens in September. So we worked really hard, and I'm happy to report that both of those roads are fully paved, and it's not just base paved, it's topped out. So they're both topped out, all the striping and signage is in. The only remaining items, it's not accepted by VDOT yet, by no means, but we're actually meeting with them for their first inspection of the topping this week on both parcels. And we also have to meet with traffic control and traffic safety, and they're going to assign the speed limits on the roads. We don't have those posted yet. So I just really wanted to stop in, give you that update, and that's really about all I have, unless you guys have any questions for
Well,
me.
I don't usually allow questions, but I want to make sure that no one has any questions. That's a big deal to us, that road. Any
Yeah,
questions?
I know.
I just want to say thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. It's
Thank
my
you for being a
pleasure.
good community partner. We
Okay.
appreciate it. All right, and now we don't have any more speaker cards, but anyone who would like to address the board may just come down here. You'll have 3 minutes to the podium. You'll start by speaking your name and your address. Well, you got to get to this podium here, so it's probably easier to go around.
I feel like a rat in a maze.
I know. And you'll have 3 minutes to address the board on any topic you would like.
Good afternoon. It's been a while since I've been here.
Your name and address, please.
Oh, sorry. Bruce Jackson, 115 Oak Lawn Road, Stafford. I found out yesterday that you guys are going over new business to what I believe is extend the no-shooting neighborhoods. I'm here to speak against that for a couple of reasons. You give a false sense of security to yourselves when you do that. I know that the state allows you to control discharge when not in lawful self-defense, but the problem is all you're doing is affecting really the law-abiding. You already have noise ordinances, and every person, every shooter is ultimately responsible for every bullet, for every projectile that comes out of their gun, out of their bow, out of their crossbow. So no shooting doesn't help. I can spend thousands of dollars to put in a range that is ultimately very safe. They have boxes that will take very large calibers and not allow the bullet to escape. And you have made my neighborhood already a no-shoot neighborhood. We had a deer get injured just a couple of years ago. When Quantico started shooting, it upset the deer. I know that might surprise you. But one of the deers got hung up on a fence and it broke its back. And the whole time we are standing there and could have done something to put the deer out of its misery, we couldn't because we had to wait for law enforcement to get there because it is a no-shoot neighborhood. You do not do yourselves nor your constituents any favors when you extend the no-shoot neighborhoods. It is just not, like I said, I just went to the NRA convention this past weekend. For a couple of $1,000s, I can get a box that will stop a bullet point blank. That same bullet has been effective in a sniper's gun in Afghanistan at over a mile. It can stop another bullet that has been effective on target, not in a sniper scenario, but just target shooting scenario, at over 2 miles. The warning on a box of .22 long rifle says, I think last time I looked was 1.5 miles. As time goes on, it increases. I understand that. But the bottom line is, to make the neighborhood no shoot does not protect it from anything coming into the neighborhood. It just makes the people in the neighborhood unable to follow their hobbies or do what they would like to do. And with suppressors, the amount of noise is limited. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Would anyone else in the board chambers like to address the board? All right, then we will close the presentation by the public portion of this and bring it back to committee reports by board members.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes, we had a VRE meeting. Not a lot of information to bring back there. I think Mr. Milday was there as well. And also, I went to Richmond to attend the VACO Budget Committee, and I'm happy to report that the dues are staying level, not going up. So that's usually county administrators like to hear that. And actually, we're trying to put a strategy in place where we can get more revenue from our marketing agreements and actually try to push the taxpayer dollars dues down. So hopefully there's more to follow with that. That's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Bumke?
Yes, I participated in the Comcast Day of Caring, which was held last Saturday, and Comcast took on a project at the Butler Road Route 1 interchange, and we combined our efforts with the Sheriff's Department and also with Park and Recreation. So I want to thank them because they did a tremendous amount of lifting and purchasing all the flowers and picking up a lot of mulch. And we've totally redid that area, just to make it look a lot more presentable. But I want to thank Comcast because they had over 100,000 volunteers throughout the nation on about 900 different community projects. So thank you for them, and thank you for everybody that came out and supported that project. We had a great time, and it looks a lot better. I'm sure many of my colleagues, if not all of them, read the email that we received from Chief Lockhart. But this past Saturday, our fire and rescue units were conducting a routine training involving swift water proficiency on the Rappahannock River. And during the training exercise, the witnesses, the gentlemen that were down there, they noticed two people that were in distress over off of Lux Island. And I just want to say thank you and a huge shout out to them. They ended up saving, we could have had a tragedy with 6 people's lives that we could have lost. And they jumped into gear and were immediately in the water. And seriously, we had 6 people whose lives were saved. And I think being at the right place at the right time really paid off there as well. We had an infrastructure meeting this afternoon, and probably the most notable thing on there was regarding all the changes to the courthouse road improvements. And VDOT is going to be working with us on a whole communication plan because that is going to be massive for this area. It's going to take 3 years for the project to be done. And then also we're doing a project at Telegraph Road and Route 1. And so we'll be keeping the community, updated as we have more information so people are able to move around the area and the region as they need to in the most expeditious way that they can with the traffic that we have up here. Thank you.
We're going to back up to Mr. Thomas real quick.
Yes, we had a Community and Economic Development Committee. Meg's comments reminded me about that. A couple highlights from the committee meeting. We're looking at possibly sending to the Utilities Commission an adjustment where if a property owner has a house that's a rental, right now, if they're between renters, there's a couple of fees that go into effect for like 1 month, and they don't make a lot of sense. So we're sending that to the Utilities Commission. We've also talked about changes to our dog licensing practices. General Assembly passed some legislation that gives localities more options. One of those is potentially a lifetime dog license. So we discussed that as well, and there'll be more to follow on that. And we also discussed a possible change to their Germana deed that currently exists. As you know, Stafford County, one of our priorities is to bring a campus for our community college to Stafford, and there's been some suggestions for the language that may make the state a little more comfortable when the next bond package comes up. So the board is entertaining that, and I think the county administrator is going to work with the community college and with Mr. Milday to bring back a recommendation to the board. That is my report, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cavalier?
Thank you. Some of the events I went to and meetings, first off, the Fredericksburg Regional Alliance. One of the major decisions there was to not renew the contract of the consulting firm that was looking for expansion of off-base offices for Quantico Marine Corps Base. And to do that as a region, that was looked at, and that would entail involving the other counties in the regional alliance, which is Spotsylvania, Caroline, King George, and the city of Fredericksburg. So I think Stafford is best positioned to accommodate any off-base expansion for operations at Quantico. So I think at this point we need to focus on working with the base commander and their higher headquarters to see if there's anything that we can do to accommodate any expansion that they have coming in the near future. I attended the Aquia Harbor Property Owners Association Board of Directors meeting. Mr. Milday was also there. Of course, one of their primary topics that they like to hear about is the Aquia Town Center redevelopment, and I'll let Mr. Milday elaborate on that since that's his district. I also went to the kind of the grand reopening of the Widewater Volunteer Fire Department, Station 3, where we have now positioned career staffing. There are 2 career staffers out there trained for basic life support, so they will be there 24/7 and add, immediate coverage to the outer regions of Widewater, and certainly the people out there are very appreciative of that. We also then did some minor renovation of the bunk space, in particular at the station, to make it more accommodating for overnight stays. So I think that's a first good step there, and I'm hopeful that we can go from BLS to ALS, Advanced Life Support, sometime in the very near future. Also, as well as to get to 3 personnel out there versus 2, because that was the original plan. I attended the Quantico Innovation Center Executive Committee meeting last Thursday at Quantico Corporate Center, where they did have a fire in the old building that we were in, so I guess it's a good thing that they moved to the new building, but it didn't interrupt any operations there, so to speak. There was some major damage on the roof, but no loss of life or major injuries, so that was a good thing. And lastly, I attended the Stafford Hospital Volunteer Luncheon, and of note, I'd like to point out that one of my constituents, Mr. David Young, he got his pin for 4,000 hours of volunteer service at Stafford Hospital since it's been open, which has just been, less than 10 years now. And he then also had 3,000 more hours at Mary Washington before Stafford opened, so he has over 7,000 hours of volunteer service alone. And so I wanted to make sure I recognized him today, because that he has devoted a lot of his life in retirement now to that effort, and it's a very worthwhile effort. We recognize our volunteers here in the county for citizens assistance and other things, but the hospital is truly a part of this community, and any volunteerism there should be counted as volunteerism for the county and should be recognized as such. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Mrs. Mauer?
Attended the Quantico Civilian Military Affairs Council. I want to thank Fakir for hosting us for lunch. And to build off of what Mr. Cavalier said, we had an excellent conversation with our county administrator, Mr. Foley over here, and the gentleman who's in charge of base facilities. And it looks like there's some opportunities that might be percolating in the North Stafford area. Also attended the Apple Grove Community Homeowners Association meeting, and I want to thank staff for providing as much information as you do in order for me to interact with the community members. They greatly appreciate the amount of detail that I'm able to provide them, and they're looking forward to the monthly newsletter. So looking forward to getting the details on that as well. And finally, I attended the AFCEA scholarship. The AFCEA Quantico Potomac chapter gives out about $50,000 to $75,000 a year in scholarships to graduating high school seniors who are going to be studying STEM-related fields. In addition to that, we also give out scholarships, $1,000 scholarships to current college kids in Virginia who are also in STEM-related fields. And the thing that's really interesting about this is that if you ever doubt that the future of America is bright, you should really look at these scholarship applications. We have some talented people here in Stafford County, and I'm proud that they attend our schools and they give back to their community, and they're getting incredible grades, and I'm just looking forward to the contributions that they make in the future. But one of the things that's really interesting is every time I go to an Eagle Scout award, I always tell them to apply for the AFCEA Quantico Potomac Chapter Scholarship. And I don't know if Mr. Asmus or Mr. Ackridge has received their notifications yet, but I really appreciate them listening to me, because each one of them were awarded $2,000 last week. And maybe I'm letting the cat out of the bag, but those scholarship announcements should be coming to them. And I want to encourage all of our Eagle Scouts to apply for this scholarship, because those are some really incredible people that we get to interact with on a regular basis. And Stafford County does a great job, and so does Stafford County Public Schools. Thank you very much.
Ms. Sellers?
Thank you, ma'am. I had the opportunity to welcome Sheehy Toyota to 610 last week, B1015, or maybe 2 weeks ago. It was the same day as Comcast Cares. B1015 came out. It was a pretty good day, great event. I've also attended the Chaplain Office on Youth meeting, and we may have some work we could do with them to help some of our private day school issues. So we're having some discussions about maybe we could partner, and so that's a good opportunity. And coincidentally, Mrs. Kraus is also on that committee, so she knows what we're talking about on all of them. So working hard on that. On May 10th, so it's coming up, is the Opiates Day, the Opiates Forum. I've been asked to sit on that panel in the morning, so starting at 8, and then later that evening they're going to present the movie that the FBI did, Chasing the Dragon, which talks about opiates. It's been an issue that I've talked a lot about with members of the board now in the community, because the face of addiction is changing. It's impacting everybody's lives, and the governor has taken a stand on it. The state is getting involved, and the feds are as well. As Congressman Whitman said the last meeting, this is an epidemic in this country. And so if anybody who's interested, anybody who knows somebody who may or may not be impacted by this, come out and see the video. It is very very visual. I don't know what the word is, so it's not for little kids, but older kids bring out and let them see what could happen. It was also, part of it was filmed here at Rappahannock, so it is a local issue to us. So come out next week. It's May 10th, and it's at 5 o'clock at the Fix Center, correct? Yep. So that's all I have.
Mr. Snellings?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I just want to take an opportunity to clarify the speaker's comments earlier about the no-shoot zone. What is on the agenda this afternoon is a discussion not to expand it. That's not what the discussion is about. The discussion is to give certain communities the ability to petition the board to include them in a no-shoot zone. So you'll learn more about it, but I want to make sure I got that out in case someone turned off the television before it came up. Just to expand a little bit on what Ms. Bomke said about the river and the rescue last week, pretty dramatic thing that went on there, and we had the same thing happen a couple weeks ago. So I just want to bring that back up to urge people, or to make sure people understand, that is a very dangerous, unforgiving river. It is not for the weak, it is not for the amateur. We've had 100 people drowned on that river in that section in the last 25 or 30 years. So if you go on that river, you better know what you're doing, or with somebody that does. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Milday.
All right, I'm going to follow up on a couple of things that were talked about. The Infrastructure Committee meeting was especially a good meeting. We really got to look at some of the details on some of the projects going on in Stafford County, for instance. And you can find these on the interactive transportation map that link to the county website. You can just click on a project, it'll show you the details. But we got to see what we're going to start acquiring utilities in 30 to 40 days for the improvements right here next to the courthouse. Then these run from the Hope Road intersection and further, a little bit further north, and of course the Courthouse Road intersection a little bit further south. And it's pretty amazing stuff we're doing here with some landscaping, turn lanes, and changing of the signalization of the lights, which is really going to do a lot to change the look and more importantly, I think, improve traffic flow big time through the courthouse area. Also, Ms. Bomke mentioned the Courthouse Road project, but she was referring to the Courthouse Road I-95 interchange that is also attached to a 4-lane widening, straightening of Courthouse Road West all the way to Winding Creek. That is almost $180 million, actually probably with the smart scale parking lot addition to the commuter parking lot, about $180 million worth of work that will be, you'll see it, of course, the old Sunoco that used to charge $1 too much for gas is now going to be, you'll see the trailers for VDOT that are being set up there. This is a big project, $180 million. It'll be finished in 3 years, and it's really going to change everything about the area. We won't get to the 95 the way we go now, but you're going to like it. You're going to like what you get. And also another project in Jack Cavalier's district, the Telegraph Road intersection at the Crucifix, which has always been a problem, is going to get fixed. It's just a matter of how we fix it. So there's 3 designs on the books, and all of those designs get rid of that 45-degree angle, which is a problem. I thank you, Mr. Cavalier, for suggesting that I'd like to talk about a quiet town center. We have that on closed session, not because there's a problem, but because we're still working through some of the developer Kroger/Harris Teeter issues. But the fact is, we don't have a signature yet from Kroger, but we still think it's imminent. So, and as many of you know, hopefully all of you know, we're constructing an armed services memorial, an $838,000 armed services memorial here on the government campus right behind us. This construction has started since the last meeting. It's pretty easy to find. As part of our efforts to honor those who have served, those who are serving and their families, Stafford County will buy a brick now for all of those who have lived in Stafford or called Stafford home and given their lives in service to their country. That's a decision we've made to try to honor the fallen. So that will be something you can expect to see when that is finished, a brick for each person that we can identify that called Stafford home and lived here, that has given their life in service to their country. And this small gesture will help us express our never-ending gratitude to those Staffordians who did so. Also, some big news since last meeting is the National Association of Counties has awarded us the 2017 National Achievement Award for our strategies. It's entitled Strategies for Saving Open Space, a Stafford County Priority, in the category of planning. This is directly related to our efforts to conserve open space through our PDR. They mentioned the PDR program, the TDR program, the fact that we've saved over 10,000 acres, beautiful acres in Stafford that will never be developed, and conservation easements and under government control. So the description of our program and the NACO awards will be made available to counties across the nation. We hope they follow our lead in making saving open space a priority. Indeed, we are following the lead of some others, or other counties that are ahead of us, but we're certainly pioneering the way in Virginia, we think. And with that, I'll go to the typically very short report from the county attorney.
Defer any comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right. How about Mr. Foley, county administrator?
I do have just one item, which is a follow-up from previous month's Community Economic Development Committee. At that time, we reviewed the proposal for a Redevelopment Advisor to assist the county in some more urban type of development. I want to spend just a couple minutes on that and get some direction from the board to move that forward. If I could have the presentation. Over the past several years, the county has put considerable effort into the planning for the development and redevelopment of the courthouse area. Stafford Hospital is one very notable change that has started to create that movement. While these efforts have begun to move development forward, the density necessary to create a walkable, attractive center for Stafford County that attracts retail, restaurant, and commercial business has not been achieved up to this point. Given the significant amount of investment made, and more importantly, the investment planned, infrastructure to attract a private partner is important in the development of a more urban place. So I want to spend just a few minutes talking about one of the critical resources to help make that happen. Real purpose here is to discuss procurement of a redevelopment advisor to provide the expertise to accelerate the redevelopment of the courthouse redevelopment area. And as you can see, a number of services listed before you. The primary issue here is to identify and evaluate public-private partnership opportunities for development and redevelopment, and to develop and leverage those partnerships to assist in financing the construction of county-owned facilities. As the board's aware, we're talking about a $70 million court project for this area. The question is, how might that be leveraged to do more than just provide court services? You can see that the expertise I'm talking about, some of the things that are necessary to help us in that effort, expertise in real estate, market analysis and valuation, fiscal impact analysis, and development negotiations are things that are important to bring together a more urban kind of place with the complications of multiple properties. We bring to the table something very significant with all the investments that we've made up to this point, and more importantly, the investments that we're planning to make. How do we use those in partnership, and why are these services important at this time? First of all, your vision for the courthouse area through the comp plan and an adopted master redevelopment plan approved in 2011. As you see before you, the intersection up to the upper right-hand corner of the slide is a designated mixed-use development area right here in the courthouse. You can see the government center. If you look to the left lower quadrant, the yellow area there, the largest piece, that's all county-owned property where we have planned for a new court facility. Basically, a very large building and a lot of surface area for parking. The vision for that area, if you look at that same quadrant, is a mixed-use area with multiple buildings and both public and private facilities, and one critical component being the likely need for structured parking so that you don't eat up all the land for surface parking. The redevelopment plan, which was approved, envisioned something more like this with a walkable community, not unlike the streetscape that we just talked a little bit about with street trees and sidewalks in the infrastructure committee meeting today with the upgrades to Courthouse Road. But this is more of the vision that we had called out for. The question is, how do we take full advantage of the opportunity to do that? I've mentioned before the previous and planned investments in roads, utilities, and new courthouse. We spent a lot of time talking about that today, and Mr. Milday just covered a bunch of that. Also talked about the courthouse itself. But here in total is what we have either planned or already implemented in terms of infrastructure in this immediate courthouse targeted growth area. Over $314 million either in place or planned, including those transportation improvements, and that court facility at about $70 million. Also, in 2015, the board adopted a new strategic plan for economic development. We are primed to try to move that forward, and this is an opportunity to help promote that. It's also important when we spend lots of dollars on very thick plans that they don't just sit on the shelf, but that we actually move from planning to implementation. So what we're talking about with a redevelopment advisor is someone that helps us to move plans actually into implementation. So exploring partnerships to help do this, and one of the primary responsibilities of this advisor will be to achieve multiple opportunities and priorities of the board, not just meeting court space needs, but implementing that vision of redevelopment and the economic development priorities. Partnerships also create opportunities to save money on large projects. If we're going to invest some infrastructure to put a court in place, that same infrastructure could serve the private sector as well and be a catalyst for some more economic development. So there are opportunities to save on project costs and long-term debt service. And given the challenge of the court financing and a new high school on the horizon, looking for creative ways to do that is particularly important at this point in time. Overall, it's an opportunity to expand the county's commercial and overall business tax base through mixed use. And that vision of a downtown Stafford or a town center concept is really critical in all the planning documents that we put together. We need to take advantage of our opportunities when we're going to put public dollars in to try to create that at the same time. And when that is created, a downtown Stafford, it has an impact on the larger targeted growth area to help promote other commercial, retail, and other types of commercial development. So all of these things are playing together. We think that there is an opportunity to take advantage and use our public investments as a catalyst to create that downtown we're talking about, but we believe that a redevelopment advisor and the expertise that they're going to bring to the table is what's necessary to really accelerate the pace of the kind of progress that we'd like to see. So with that said, I wanted to point out that we've already set some money aside. We have the Stafford Opportunity Fund with about $500,000 set aside. And in the budget that you all just recently adopted, we set aside some additional money for economic development strategic investments or initiatives, and that money is available as well to pay for these services. So staff's recommendation is that if we're going to accelerate the pace of redevelopment and economic development, we are going to need some redevelopment advisory services. I will mention that Fairfax County and Hampton and Albemarle County have all moved down this path to try to achieve the kind of things we've talked about. This is not something new. Even Fairfax County, with its own separate economic development authority that is its own body with lots of funding, is also reaching out for these kind of services rather than having them on staff. This would be a contract for services that would help us to organize and make sure that we're looking comprehensively at the entire redevelopment area and making decisions that work together, including things like the streetscape we talked about this afternoon. Because the EDA, the Economic Development Authority, is a critical partner in anything that we're going to do to try to accelerate the pace of things, we think it's important to work on that partnership, make sure that we're all on the same page and moving in the same direction. So we're also recommending that we have a joint meeting with the EDA to talk about this approach and the partnership that's going to be necessary to successfully do the financings and promote economic development the way we'd like to. So that's a quick overview of some things we talked about, I think, last month, but wanted to perhaps talk about more concisely. The recommendation is board's concurrence with the effort to move forward to procure a redevelopment advisor.
Mr. Cavalier.
Tom, the question I had was back on the funding sources. I know the Opportunity Fund with the $500,000 and the, I just wasn't sure on the Economic Development Strategic Initiatives funding. What do we have, what was that envisioned for originally?
We actually had envisioned that there might be some services that we would need to promote economic development in a different kind of way. The Opportunity Fund is more of a matching fund with state grants, but that could be considered in some different kinds of ways. We would certainly bring that back to you. But we really do think that this money that you set aside this year, this $230,000, is the money that would be an ongoing source to help have these kinds of services. I will say that when we put the budget proposal together, we looked at the merchant's cap tax and whether we might cut that in half. What we proposed to you was that we consider reducing it by 25%, but take the other 25% and just set it aside for strategic planning initiatives. So that's the money that came out of that discussion and is now set aside for some purpose such as this.
Okay, thank you.
So, first of all, I agree completely with this vision and the timing of this. You don't know how much it's going to cost, obviously, right? Is that why we don't have an ask?
No, I think we're going to have to take proposals in and estimate that. I do think that it is going to be, it's not going to be a $50,000 study as an example. This is going to be more of an ongoing source, and maybe it's in the neighborhood of $100,000 to get that kind of services to help you. I think the return on investment, I think, will be considerable with some success in this effort.
And what is the next step that you need from us? I concur. I can't speak for the rest of the board. Does anyone have any objections or want to talk about concerns here? So I think you have concurrence. What
Okay,
else?
we would issue an RFP and go through a process.
I would prefer that the money come from that second source versus the opportunity fund, though, because I think we have some ideas for opportunity fund, and we need that money available for other things.
Agreed. Okay,
Great.
good thinking, good work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, so do we have any additions or deletions from the agenda? I don't believe we do.
There are none, Mr. Chair.
All right, so our agenda is good to go. And now we have a consent agenda. Would anyone like to pull an item from the consent agenda? Ms. Bomke,
Yes, I would like to pull item number 8, please.
number 8 is pulled. Any others? All right, I'll entertain a motion to move
So moved.
Second?
the consent agenda minus number 8. All right, cast your votes. Tally the votes. And that passes unanimously. Ms. Bomke, number 8.
Yes. I would like to motion for approval of item number 8, but I'm just really excited about this. I'm not a big soccer player, but I know it's a huge athletic event in Stafford County, and I think it's really exciting that the Soccer Association is willing to add this adult league to their platter of things that they offer in the community. And I see Barry Hill, the coach and general manager for the Soccer Association, out here in the audience. And thank you for all your efforts. You're a constant hard worker. I see you with the kids out at Pratt Park, coaching and doing a fabulous job. And so I'm really excited for this addition in Stafford County for this adult league.
All right. Did you moved approval, right?
Yes.
And we have a second from Ms. Sellers? All right, please cast your votes. Tally the votes. And that passes unanimously. And that brings us to, let's see, unfinished business. Item number 17, Planning and Zoning, consider the creation of a new overlay district entitled Integrated Corporate and Technology Park. Hi, Jeff.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, board members. I'm Jeff Harvey, the Director of Planning and Zoning. This item is a carryover from your March 7th meeting, in which the board had a public hearing to consider establishing a new zoning category known as ICTP. This ordinance 017-03 would establish the zoning district regulations. It would not rezone any property at this point in time. That would take further board actions to consider if whether or not a rezoning would be acceptable. This proposed ordinance would apply to large corporate and office complexes, specifically ones that are at least 400,000 square feet in size. It would also allow for a variety of commingled uses between what we normally see in commercial and industrial zoning categories. We have at least two major projects in the county that fit this general concept. One is Quantico Corporate Center, the other is Riverside Business Park. Both have predominantly industrial zoning associated with them. However, there's been observed need for other services that are commercial in nature, like childcare, restaurants, personal service establishments, things of that nature, which under the current zoning scheme are either not allowed or very difficult to be able to accommodate. So that's the purpose of this overlay zone, to allow for those kind of integration of uses. The overlay zone would try to keep in context the overall corporate nature of these types of facilities, and stipulate that any new buildings would be essentially 3 to 4 stories tall. So it would not be low-scale, typical retail development like you'd see elsewhere in the county. It would be more higher-rise type of development. One of the things the board has to consider with this amendment is we recently adopted a comprehensive plan change to look at this vision. One of the things that's a little bit different from the ordinance to what the comp plan language is dealing with multifamily dwellings in that the proposed ordinance language currently as written allows for multifamily dwellings, whereas the comp plan part does not address that. It's silent to housing. So staff would recommend the board consider adopting the ordinance. We feel it's got a lot of value, but keep in mind that the comprehensive plan does not address the housing component at this point in time.
Any questions about this item? Any questions? Well, let me start. Get you guys thinking about it. So we have seen this in different parts of this. One was the designated area, an overlay on our comprehensive land use plan. Another is the actual zoning category. Are we talking about the zoning category right now?
Correct, Mr. Milley. This would create the zoning district regulations.
Right, so what we're so used to saying, A1, A2, R1, R2, R3, B1, B2, PD2, this just would add another one to that list, correct?
That is correct. And the way an overlay works is that you still have your underlying M1 and B2 industrial and commercial zoning, but this would allow for additional regulations. In some cases, could be more restrictive, and others could be more liberal.
So you create an overlay zoning category that lives in conjunction with another underlying zoning category.
Yes, sir.
But nothing, how does something achieve that secondary, or in this case, this secondary ICTP zoning category?
In order to establish the overlay zoning district, the Board of Supervisors would have to rezone property for that overlay district, similar to what we have like a highway corridor overlay district along a lot of our major roads
But you would do it
in
by
the county.
parcel or area by area?
Yes, it can be done either way.
Okay, so this is
It does
zoning-
involve public hearings with the Plan Commission and the board. It can be either initiated on the board's behalf, or a owner can petition to be within it. And that was some of the debate and discussion with the Planning Commission and their concerns about the housing component. They were concerned if the a future board was to rezone some properties to this overlay, housing could be a component of that project in the future, and if the board initiated the rezoning, there would not be proffers necessarily. However, if a property owner petitions, they could offer proffers to mitigate their impacts, and that was a lot of discussion that the Planning Commission had.
And can the ICTP exist with any of our current zoning categories, or does it only work in the M1?
It can go with any place we have a corporate campus that meets the qualifications. Right now, we have
it's
two
not-
primarily that are M1 and B2 zoned, I guess. Riverside Business Park is strictly M1, but they've asked for B2 zoning on one of their buildings, but they haven't moved forward with that application as of yet.
But for instance, an M1 zoning category, does it have things in it that are not allowed in the ICTP? So would it be advantageous to have the M1 and the ICTP on your property?
Yes, and if I could have the computer, please. It's also included in a attachment within the staff report, but this slide summarizes the additional uses that would be allowed in both the B2 and the M1 zoning district. The M1 district by far gets a lot more advantage because you're adding more retail type of activities that currently aren't allowed in industrial zones. There are some additional uses that benefit in the B2 zone as well.
And while we're at it, looking down this at the bottom at the right, microbreweries are allowed in the M1 zoning district with a CUP. Could this additional zone, because I don't remember us having dual zoning on a piece of property, but I'm going to ask that question next. You could also have allowances in the new ICTP that were only allowed through a conditional use permit?
Yes, the overlay zone can be more restrictive and require a use permit where one doesn't normally exist. An example of that is our highway corridor overlay district, where we require certain activities to get a conditional use permit, like a hotel or some other high traffic generation use.
So an HCOD, a highway corridor overlay district, nobody ever comes in and asks to be in that. We created that and imposed it on highway corridors. And is this the same, is this extra ICTP is it like or is it the same as the highway corridor?
It's similar but different. It's it depends on how the board wants to administer it and run. This is hopefully an economic development tool that gives property owners within those areas more flexibility on businesses they attract, as well as making more livable space, so that, and also workable space, whereas someone who's employed in one of these complexes should be able to get the services they need, like restaurants and banks and things of that nature, right next door within the same building that they're in, versus having to drive elsewhere in the county.
So if I applied for ICTP to be on my property, would I then, and got approved, would I then refer to my own zoning category as M1 ICTP, or would I still have M1 property with a overlay attached to it? I'm just wondering.
If a property owner was listing all their applicable zoning, they would start with the base zoning,
So
the M1.
it's a dual zoning, it's a dual
Yes.
zoning. And HCOD is not a zoning, is it?
Yes, it's
Okay,
an
so it's a dual
it's an
zoning,
overlay
HCOD
zone.
is a dual zoning too.
Correct. Chesapeake Bay Act is also an overlay zone.
Okay.
Flood hazard is an overlay zone.
And and by creation of this, we don't, it doesn't automatically apply to anything.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. There are certain qualifications within the purpose of the district. Again, it has to be within a project that has corporate.
But even if something
office
already
space.
meets the qualifications, by passing this, would it automatically have this overlay zoning on it?
No, sir. The board would still have to go through the process of rezoning the property to this overlay.
Okay. I've gotten my questions out. Thank you. Ms. Pomke?
Okay, so in this ICTP, we're proposing the 24 units per dwelling unit, 24 units per acre, right?
Yes, it's
Okay.
multifamily housing.
So do we have any other existing zoning categories within the county where we have the 24 units per acre?
Ms. Bomke, not specifically that high. We, in our UD zone as well as our PT&D zone, we have some higher density, but not quite as high as the 24.
In the receiving areas of the TDR would that qualify as a?
That also allows for some higher density, but again, not as high as 24 units
Right,
per acre.
16.
Okay, and what about, because you're going to be looking at units that are higher, buildings that are higher, our current ordinance is 80 feet tall, correct?
The current ordinance is, if I remember right, in the M1 and B2, it's 75, and this would allow it to go up to 80. There's
Okay.
a minimum of 40 feet. So again, it's trying to get buildings to be typically between 3 and 4 stories.
Okay, all right, how would you, I guess one thing that concerns me is seeing the multifamily dwelling units under the B2 zoning. So how would we deal with the off-site proffers as it relates to the schools? And when do you measure, let's see if I can ask this question right, when do you measure what the off-site proffer date would be? Is it when they submit their zoning application, or what's the trigger date for when you calculate your proffers for schools?
Well, Ms. Bomke, the discussion of proffers would apply in the case of a landowner requesting the zoning change to this new district. Under the current state proffer legislation, the time that you determine impact to public facilities like schools, parks, and public safety is at the time of rezoning. So that's when the analysis would have to be done in order to determine what the impact is, and then also negotiating what that offsetting cost would be to the county and what the developer would pay in a proffer.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any more questions? Are we allowed to, right now, as it currently stands, it shows 24 units as applicable?
Yes, sir.
And if, I don't know what the board is feeling about this, but are we allowed to lessen that number if we wanted to?
I believe so, Mr.
Legal.
Chairman. I have to check with the attorney depending upon the extent of the
The
changes.
second question, so you can think about it in the context, if we wanted to allow any number up to 24, but only with a conditional use permit, would we be able to do that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as a governing body, you have up to 24 units. You can go below that, and you can so designate what you want in your motion for approval, or if you deny it, you can do that. But you have the ability to be flexible as to the density that you allow on a piece of property. That's your job.
There you go. Mr. Cavalier?
Since this proposal generally takes into account Quantico Corporate Center primarily at this point, and I know there has been a recent development where there is let's just say that the sense of urgency has dissipated. And so with the questions that are out there right now and with no sense of urgency, I would ask that we defer this item at this time. And I'll make that a motion.
Second.
We have a motion for deferral with a second. Ms. Sellers?
I don't remember hearing the answer to the second part of the question on the conditional use permit. So we can impose a conditional use permit? Or would we have to
Can
send it?
you clarify
Mr.
specifically?
Milday had this, he asked if we could change it to require a conditional use permit for the density,
For the residential component.
for the residential component. Can we do that, or would we have to send that back to the planning commission?
I think you'd have to send that back. If you don't have that part in front of you now and you're going to redo it, you're going to have to go back. I think that's a material change.
Okay, thank
If I
you.
understand your question correctly.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, Ms. Bauer?
So refresh my memory, because what the Planning Commission sent to us, did that have the residential component? I guess the Planning Commission had sent back a version that took out the residential component, or had the residential component with a conditional use permit?
Ms. Mauer, you are correct. This item has been back and forth between the Plan Commission and Board. When the Board initially sent it to the Planning Commission, it included housing at 24 units an acre. The Planning Commission modified the ordinance and sent it back to the Board without housing.
Okay.
And the Board said, well, we still want to have the option to consider that, and asked the Planning Commission to rehold their hearing. So that's where we are today.
I guess my question was that I don't think we took action on what the Planning Commission originally took, or sent to us. And
Correct.
so if do we have to go back to the Planning Commission if we have a previous version that's been through the Planning Commission public hearing that we haven't taken action on?
Deputy McClendon, you sit with the Planning Commission. Could I ask you to step up and address that, please?
I'm sorry.
No, that's a good question.
Rashida McClendon, Deputy County Attorney. The Planning Commission has actually held 2 public hearings on this. They held it on one without the multifamily, and I believe the board sent it back without the ability to modify. So they've actually held both public hearings. So that really gives the board the latitude between no multifamily and then yes multifamily by right. And I would consider a conditional use permit in between those. So I feel like the board has the full latitude between nothing and 24 units and kind of any amalgamation in between that.
Including the conditional use permit.
I would say so because of the amount of public hearings the Planning Commission has held on the 2, on the spectrum.
Okay.
I have
I was
another
just trying to save time and
No, that's good,
expense.
that's good, thank you. Yes?
I don't know who could answer this question. So if we look at like Riverside Corporate Center and Quantico Corporate Center and any other corporate center that may apply in the future, those roads are not state maintained, is that correct? They're private roads? Is
Ms.
that-
Baumke, and those particular projects, we have 2 different scenarios. Quantico Corporate Center has its main road as being private, whereas Riverside Business Park has its main road being public.
Okay, so let's say someday down the road, there were multifamily units in there, apartment units. Would the school buses be allowed to pick children up in front of those corporate office buildings? So the answer would be in Riverside, yes. Off of Quantico, the answer would be no.
It would, Ms. Baumke, depend on the school board's policy. I know in some communities that have private streets, like at Quiet Harbor, the schools do drive and pick up students within, on the private street. So that would be something they'd have to determine in the future.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor, and we're discussing that. I'm going, Mr. Snellings?
Real quick, just a comment, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support the motion, but I'm not going to support, in the future when it comes back, by right development. I just do not think it's right, and I think we need more control.
Ms. Sellers?
I agree with Mr. Snellings. I would almost rather send it back to the planning commission than defer it and make them look at it again without the residential component, just for one more review.
We already have the latitude to vote on it without the residential component.
Yeah,
We don't need
they
to
already
say-
did that.
So I hate, I don't want to be, I think by definition what we're doing here is the opposite of by right zoning. We are creating a zoning category. Right now in this county, we already have R4. It'll be a cold day before we ever approve any more trailer parks, but that's what R4 is. R3, you can do, I think, 7 or 15, 7 units per acre. There's a lot of pretty zoning categories, and PD2s, zoning categories here that we won't ever entertain. By creating a zoning category or an overlay zoning, you are not creating any kind of by right development. So I don't, am I misstating that, or is this, by making a category, are we creating a by right situation?
Mr. Milday, as the Planning Commission's concern was that if the board had a blanket piece of property that they rezoned at some point in time in the future, a future owner of that property could put in apartments without having to do another zoning change. And that was with a term that the Planning Commission was using to describe by right development.
I'm confused, because I'm talking about this motion, which would create an overlay or a zoning category, ICTP.
Correct.
If we created an ICTP today, could that scenario you just mentioned happen without another board action?
It would require another board action. that is
Oh, they'd have
correct.
to come in and apply for
Yes.
the rezoning. So they could also come in.
That,
and
or
apply-
if the board felt it was in the public interest, could implement or.
Or we could do it
request-
without their asking, we could just go ahead.
Yes, yes.
Could we also, next meeting, initiate rezoning most of Stafford into trailer parks?
Yes, sir.
You could, right?
If the board felt it was in the public
And
interest.
if someone had no sense of what was going on here, they could come in and apply to rezone, half the courthouse area into trailer parks, right?
Yes.
Not that there's anything wrong with trailer parks. Okay, so I will not support the deferral, because I don't mind having an extra toolbox in the tool. What this is designed to do is try to take some of these spread out corporate centers that we have with all this empty space in between and do something a little more tightly knit. They ran into the same problem in Fairfax at Tyson's Corner, and we are no Tyson's Corner, mind you, but when you space these buildings apart, you end up sometimes with not a very situation conducive to walkable neighborhoods. So I don't mind having the tool in the toolbox. So that's all I have for discussion. Any final comments before we call the? I mean, I don't know where everyone else is on this. No one has voiced support to my position.
Mr. Chairman, I will. I would move approval with the conditional use permit for any residential component, which is what the Planning Commission has suggested. I'd like us to consider that, because I agree there are some nice components to this. One's the road.
I'll tell you. She's making a motion to approve the creation of a zoning category with up to 24 units, but only with a conditional use permit that would have to be approved by this board, along with the rezoning to ICTP. And I'll second that. Mr. Thomas?
I just wanted to correct, she said that's what the planning commission suggested, and that's not what they suggested. What they suggested is no residential, just, so.
Any more discussion?
Make a comment. I know I seconded the deferral motion. I am going to support the
Substitute motion?
Thank you, the substitute motion. This is another tool in the toolbox, and what this is looking at, and there are a couple of points that I want to make very clear on this. Number one, you have to have 400,000 square feet of existing office space before you can do apartments. And so when you start thinking about 400,000 square feet, you're thinking of more than 1,000 people going to and from these office parks. And that, or actually, I think it's 4,000 people if you assume 100 square feet per person. And so we need to start looking at the fact that that would have a significant transportation impact. And if people want to live, work, play, which is what we talk about in Stafford County, it's part of our motto, then we need to start looking at the next iteration of this. And due to the fact that the rezoning does not apply unless you, or the apartments are not applicable unless you have the 400,000 existing square feet of office space, I think that this would be a good next step.
And the CUP, mind you.
And a CUP. CUP.
Another
So,
board action.
so you have to, this is, nothing in here is by right. You have to apply for the rezoning, and then you have to apply for a CUP in order to get the residential. And so I think there's a two-prong protection, and would require two board actions now in order to approve the residential component.
Mr. Cavalier?
Well, I'm a little befuddled because I didn't think there was support for the residential component at all at the last go-round, or one of the iterations that we have here, which, and I energetically support this concept from the get-go. But the only thing I don't like is more government intervention here in the terms of the CUP. I wanted it to go through as is, and but in the spirit of compromise, I will reluctantly agree to that motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Sellers?
Just to add to, with the conditional use permit, then we can also discuss what the size of these apartments are. We can talk about.
Proffers.
We can do conditions. And talk about what we want them to look like in keeping with the spirit of the tech park. So that's why I support it with the conditional use permit, and then also down there, probably eventually at the Riverside, because then you do have more control.
There is currently no application before us that I know of that would use this. Is that correct? Correct. So this is just a concept, by the way. Mr. Snellings?
I know all about concepts, I can tell you that right now. These concepts turn into apartments. I got a question. If we pass with a CUP, is that still in conflict with the comp plan?
Mr. Snellings, the comp plan is silent. It does not talk about housing for these types of overlays.
So this is in conflict with the comp plan?
And that could be interpreted as that, yes.
I will take it that that is a yes, it's in conflict. Thank you.
I'll take it as a no. Go ahead.
How many residential apartments could be developed in Quantico based on this ICTP proposal? How many apartments are we talking about?
Ms. Bomke, I can give you some answers there. If I have the computer, please.
Did you already show that to us?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay.
This is an image that was in your board package. It shows 3 vacant land bays that are not owned by the county within Quantico Corporate Center. The county does own one large parcel in the southern end of the project. The 3 vacant land bays are Area 1, which is 12 acres, Area 2, which is 9.5, which currently has a site plan in for a hotel on it that encompasses 2.27 acres, and then Area 3, which is 1.7 acres. In all likelihood, in practicality, probably Area 1 is the area where you'd see future residential housing. And it's estimated if they went to the full 24 units per acre, that'd be 288 units.
288 units on Area 1.
Correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What other zoning categories could we rezone to put, how about if they just rezoned areas 2, 3, and 1 to R4 trailer parks? How many trailers could they stick there?
Well, the R4 zone allows 7 units per acre.
So we've got,
So Area
21,
1 would
30,
be 84 units on Area 1.
so we could and they could come in and zone it for, and it's about the same as R3 then?
Correct.
And we don't have a cluster in R3 anymore, do we?
Correct, that is correct.
So the most it can get is, so you could rezone it to anything.
Okay, so, did you have a question, Bob? All right, so let's take this one step further. So if we had 280 apartments at Quantico Corporate Center, because it's not likely at Riverside right now, what would the proffers look like for that project if we have excess current capacity right now up in that area at, what would that be, Widewater Elementary or Shirley High Middle?
Yes.
And Stafford, North Stafford or Brook Point? Brook Point, okay.
Well, Ms. Bomke, the way the proffer law reads, that they have, an applicant would have to submit an impact statement to the county, which we would analyze and potentially agree to. That
Right.
impact statement would have to demonstrate that there is not adequate capacity in those public facilities in order for them to offer a proffer. So if there are seats available in any of those schools at the time that they try to rezone, the county would not be able to accept the proffer from a developer. In the case of what Ms. Sellers was referring to with a conditional use permit, the county could impose conditions on the number of bedrooms in the apartment units, get into more specific detail about the architecture, maybe possibly require structured parking versus surface parking, those types of things that are on-site issues we can deal with conditions of the use permit. Proffers tend to deal with some on-site as well as can deal with the off-site, like the public facilities, provided there's a deficit that can be proven.
All right, thank you.
But in this what-if game that we're playing right now, would we have to approve, this board would have to approve a rezoning to the overlay district and then also a conditional use permit to have that what-if scenario come true?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this action today, if it passes, does it create any more residential density in the county?
No, it just establishes zoning
Under
district
any
regulations.
any scenario, without another board action, does this action, if we pass it today, create a single additional residential unit in Stafford County?
No, sir, this
Thank you,
action does
Jeff.
not rezone property.
All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
I just want to make sure that we're clear how this works before the board. And it's very similar to someone now that needs to have a reclassification and a CUP. You have a joint hearing, you vote separately. If someone wants to avail themselves of this particular ordinance that we're putting in play today, and they do not have the underlying classification that they need, and remember, there are only 2 sites right now that qualify for this, they'd have to come in for a reclassification and a conditional use permit because they want to benefit from whatever is in that conditional use permit aspect. So it's going to be just like you do now. You'll have a joint hearing, but there was some discussion of having 2 separate hearings. Actually, they are combined and consolidated. So anyone that wants to avail themselves of this ordinance that we're putting in place either today or at some other time, they're going to come in and file the application in a joint fashion, and you're going to hear it in all likelihood in a joint fashion.
you can
I
approve
just want to make
one.
sure that you're clear on that.
But you can approve the rezoning classification without approving the CUP.
You have the authority to
So-
do what you want to do. You control land use in this county through your governance and your legislative
Unless it
actions.
is by right, and this does not create any by right.
By right does not come to you.
That's right, and this would not create any by right situations.
That's correct.
Thank you. Can we get this vote out of the way? Mr. Thomas, one last final word?
I know technically, you stated there is no application in front of us, but Mr. Cavalier started his initial motion with conditions on the ground have changed, so there's most certainly an applicant out there, and I think that lends to what Mr. Snellings is saying is that let's call it a proposal right now, but this will eventually turn into apartments. So from the very beginning, I've been against that idea, and I know there's an applicant because I've met with them, maybe a couple of you have, and I'm not necessarily against the kind of product that they're proposing. I've seen it. It is very, very high-end. I think it speaks to those professionals that we're trying to get to live and work in the same area. I just don't believe this is the mechanism that gets us there. So I will be not in favor of the
Just for
motion. right now.
clarification, so you're saying you would entertain a proposal for high-density residential, you just don't think this is the mechanism that gets you there?
I think the problem we have is if we entertain any residential right now with the proffer law that we just had handed to us, we're going to end up having residential units that come in, and we're not going to be able to do anything about the proffer dollars that will offset the cost of these apartments. I mean, I know we think that they're going to be young urban professionals with no students. I don't know if that's just a hope, and I don't think we can guarantee that we're going to have no families in those apartments.
But you understand that we're not talking about rezoning apartments right now?
I understand what you're saying, but this will lead to a rezoning. If there's 4 people that are in favor of this motion, there's certainly going to be 4 people that are in favor of actually using the overlay.
That is not true.
Okay. I think that's disingenuous.
And yes, the proffer laws have changed, right? Okay, we can't do the same things we'd been doing. That doesn't mean proffers go out the window. The whole program, the whole process.
Can we not have a
is just
conversation
that.
on proffers?
But when you, But to his point, he's trying to say, well, we're just not going to be able to collect proffers on them. I don't know if I agree with that. Things have changed, and we are going to have to navigate that as we go through. That's what we pay
We're
attorneys
not
for.
voting for a rezoning.
But, yeah, we're
voting
not,
for residential component, and I certainly do not favor apartments there right now. And just because I think the tool in the toolbox should be there to entertain applications does not mean, or nor am I being disingenuous when I say that I'd like to have that tool in my toolbox. I'm not, this is not a vote for apartments. And what's disingenuous is anyone that would say that it is. So I will call the question. Please cast your votes. Tally the votes. And that passes 5. Oops.
was a no.
I see it changed. A little Freudian slip, 4-3 in favor. Just kidding, Bob. I know that wasn't a slip. All right, that takes us to item 17. And do you want to just cue that up for us, Mr. Snellings? And I think it probably belongs.
Item 18, Mr. Chairman.
18, discuss no shooting zones. I think that probably belongs in,
Yeah, I asked that be put on the agenda. I'm getting several complaints, and I'm sure other board members are as well, especially in rural areas, from residents that are living in, quote, by right subdivisions. These are subdivisions that are recognized by the county. They're on the record as being subdivisions. Some of these subdivisions can be 10 homes. Some of them can be 25 homes. I've got one that's now 53 homes. They're all in A1. What I am asking the board to do is, first of all, send this to the Public Safety Committee, but that we look at including recognized subdivisions. This would only include recognized subdivisions, and would give the subdivision the opportunity to petition the board. Right now, these smaller subdivisions do not have that opportunity. They would actually petition the board to include them in a no-shoot zone. If they don't petition, then we don't change it. If they can't get enough signatures on the petition, and that will be, we'll set those guidelines, then no changes will be made. But we'll leave it up to the community, let them make their own decision. That's what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman. Go to public safety, and then their recommendation back to the
everyone
board.
good with that?
I just have one question.
Please.
Let's say 15 years from now, the landscape's changed. A neighborhood has said, we want to be no shooting, but maybe the majority at some point in the future changes their mind. Will they have the opportunity to revert?
I'll defer that to the county attorney. Rashida's been working on this with me. It's a great question.
Rashida McClendon, Deputy County Attorney. Ultimately, the board can make that decision. When making a shooting prohibited area decision, the board determines that there's an area of the county that's so heavily populated in which shooting should be prohibited therein. If at some future point there's a feeling that the area is no longer heavily populated, that shooting can happen in a way that's safe, the board could always remove that designation. And I would believe you would do it in the same way by holding a public hearing and then changing the ordinance.
Well, my follow-on to that would be, I'm not necessarily think that this is because shooting can't be done safe. It's a noise pollution problem. Sometimes it causes everybody to call us, because when you're a couple thousand feet from, weapons going off. So I think it's more about that, than it is necessarily the safety. So as we work these, we need to keep both of those in mind.
And we do have a noise ordinance that addresses that, and the sheriff's office enforces that by measuring it at the property line. This particular code provision is more about safety into to the inhabitants of the area, but we have looked at that and addressed it in our weapons ordinance with noise.
That's a great point, Mr. Thomas. Do you think, I'm just curious about the applicant, the person that came in and spoke to us last time, Gary, is she so close to this shooting that that you think it's violating the noise ordinance?
Well, I can't speak to it's violating the noise ordinance. I can tell you that the home in question borders the property where the gentleman is shooting. I'm told up to 400 rounds at a time with a very high-powered rifle. But my major concern is safety. I've got an individual near me that shoots every Sunday afternoon. Every Sunday afternoon, go for it. But safety. This individual is shooting across 2 other pieces of property that he does not own. And he's also shooting towards Able Lake. Now, if he misses this little berm that he set up, this makeshift berm, it's going out over Able Lake. Where it's going to end up, I don't know. Neither does he. So this is safety to me.
Okay. I was just wondering, Mrs. Bauer?
Yeah. The draft language that we have in here, I would like to specifically include in the process an ability to have your neighborhood removed from a shooting zone. It's implied, but I would like that option to be included.
Yes, Supervisor Mauer.
All right.
The current neighborhoods that are currently in no-shoot zones, give them the same, or would they?
Well, currently, the shooting prohibited areas that we have are not really neighborhood designations. They are boundaries on the ground. So it may be slightly difficult to do that. We would have to amend the boundaries, maybe potentially change some neighborhood language. We work with planning with regards to working on those boundaries and lines. But there's always a request that can come forward. And if the board would like to put in a percentage or a procedure with regards to channeling those requests or funneling to the board, then we can work on that language.
Okay.
All right, so do we need a motion to move that back to public safety, or can we just do that?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Please cast your votes. And tally the votes when you're ready. And that passes unanimously. Which brings us to item 19, discuss amending the board's bylaws to change the order of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms.
I
Foley.
covered that item. This item was placed on the agenda as a suggestion from staff to make a minor change to your bylaws regarding the conduct of business, and basically changing the order of business on the agenda to clarify at the very beginning of the meeting after roll call what the final agenda actually is. It's not uncommon for us to have items that maybe have been removed or changed in some way, or additional information that's important to both the board and the public. So the suggestion here is to do something that's pretty consistent with other localities, which is to basically move additions and deletions to the agenda up after the roll call, and then to have a final approval of the agenda, just so that the public and board is real clear about what we have before us for the rest of the meeting. So that's just a suggestion and a fairly common practice in other places. To bring this about, if the board supports it, we would need to move it to the May 16th agenda for your final consideration.
What's the pleasure of the board? Mr. Cavalier?
And Gary and I are on the bylaws committee, so we'll take that up. We have a meeting scheduled next week, so we'll make a formal recommendation at that point.
Okay, that's fine. All right, thank you, Mr. Foley. And at this point, I think I'm ready to be read into our next item, read into closed session.
All right. Whereas the board desires to hold a closed meeting for, one, discussion concerning the terms or scope of a public contract where discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the board, and two, discussion and consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the board. And whereas pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711, large cap A, 3, and 29, such discussions may occur in closed meeting.
Motion and seconded. Please cast your votes. You may tally the votes. Oh. And that's unanimous. We'll go into closed session. When we're finished with closed session, we'll come back out to certify, and we may or may not take an item for vote after that, but it won't be a meeting after that. We'll go to the 5:30 Planning Commission meeting upstairs in ABC, Joint Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors meeting. Thank you.
Get a little bit more attention.
We are back. Would someone please make a motion to bring us out of closed session?
Certify.
Moved and seconded. Please cast your votes and tally those votes. Anybody? All right, and we are out of closed session, and we will adjourn and go to our 5:30 joint meeting with the Planning Commission. Thank you.